Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. We are now in our third season, and we remain just as excited as ever to continue to help you explore and understand the unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. Here we look at the hottest topics related to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here, issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues and gut health, cancers, lung and heart issues, and more. So listen in today as we interview experts for today's show on plastics pollution. What is plastic pollution? Why is it important? And how did we get here? Plastic pollution is generally defined as the accumulation in the environment of synthetic plastic products to the point where they create problems for wildlife and their habitats, as well as for us, the human population. And synthetic plastics are those derived from crude oil, natural gas, or coal. The vast majority of plastic in use today is indeed synthetic plastic because of the ease of manufacturing methods involved in the processing of crude oil. Synthetic plastics make up about 95% of all plastics ever made. In 1907, the invention of a material called bakelite brought about a revolution in materials by introducing truly synthetic plastic resins into the commercial world, thus making plastics more moldable and harder, and they also included formaldehyde as well as coal tar. And by the end of the 20th century, however, plastics had been found to be persistent polluters of many environmental niches, all the way from Mount Everest to the bottom of the sea. Whether being mistaken for food by animals or flooding low-lying areas by clogging drainage systems or simply causing significant aesthetic blight, plastics have attracted increasing attention as large-scale polluters. Plastic pollution can be categorized into primary plastics, such as cigarette butts and bottle caps, or secondary plastics resulting from the degradation of the primary ones. It can also be defined by its size, from microplastics, which are very, very small. They are less than 5 millimeters, which is like something in the area of the size of a strand of your hair. Or they can be dispersed into the environment, and they can be described then as macroplastics. Plastic pollution can also take different forms, including the accumulation of waste, the accumulation of marine litter, fragments or microparticles of plastics, and non-biodegradable fishing nets, which continue to trap wildlife and waste. They can be in the form of waste causing the death of animals by ingestion of the plastic objects. And it can be the arrival of microplastics and micro beads of plastic from our cosmetics and body care products. Since its commercial development in the 1950s, plastic has been an overwhelming success commercially. Its global production is still growing exponentially. The success of plastic comes from its remarkable qualities. That is the ease of shaping, the low cost, the mechanical resistance, and other things. Being the ideal material for packaging, plastic is basically everywhere. It is ubiquitous. So let me ask you, how many times today have you run across plastic? Looking around wherever you are right now, how many items of plastic do you see? It's all around us. But plastic has significant impacts on our everyday lives and our livelihoods in the form of plastic pollution. On the environment, this plastic debris represents a chemical pollution in several ways. They contain compounds that can be chemically transferred to organisms during ingestion. some of these molecules are potentially toxic and can accumulate in the body. On animals, the most direct effect of plastic pollution is the imprisonment of animals in the nets or large debris. It is the cause of significant mortality of marine mammals, turtles, and birds. And a second direct effect is the ingestion of plastic, and that concerns the entire food chain of the marine ecosystem, all the way to our tables and then into our bodies. And on humans, because of the chemical additives used during plastic production, plastics have potentially harmful effects on human health. Indeed, exposure to toxic chemicals coming out of plastic can cause cancers, birth defects, impaired immunity, and many other health problems. Once plastic reaches the environment in the form of those macro or microplastic, it contaminates and accumulates in food chains through agricultural soils, through terrestrial and agricultural chains, and the water supply. This environmental plastic can easily leach toxic additives or concentrate toxins already in the environment, making them bioavailable again for direct or indirect human exposure. As plastic particles degrade, new surface areas are exposed, allowing continued leaching of additives from the core to the surface of the particle in the environment and in the human body. Microplastics entering the human body via direct exposure through ingestion or inhalation can lead to an array of health impacts, including inflammation or what's called genotoxicity. And genotoxicity describes the property of chemical agents that damages the genetic information within a cell, causing it to mutate, which may lead to cancer. It also causes oxidative stress, which impairs the body's ability to detoxify itself. And there are many, many other impacts which are linked to an array of negative health outcomes, including cancer, cardiovascular diseases, inflammatory bowel diseases, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, chronic inflammation, neurodegenerative diseases, and stroke. And compounding, and in some cases confounding, plastic pollution's impact on health are the thousands of additives and the behavior of those additives at every stage of the plastic life cycle. The majority of people worldwide are exposed at multiple stages of the plastic's life cycle, which primarily begins at the oil wellhead and ends somewhere and some way that we don't know. And that is because plastic is not biodegradable. It just breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces. And in fact, the mass of plastic debris present in the oceans is so enormous, it's often called the seventh continent. And at this rate, there will be more plastic than fish in the ocean by 2050. As well, just today, I received an email alert from the Center for Environmental Health, and they are alerting us to the fact that there are up to 31 times over the safe limit of plastic in a wide range of socks, including baby socks, from major brands such as Adidas, Champion, Hanes, and Reebok. As I said, it's all around us in ways that we don't even know about. So this is a lot. But here to help us unpack this and understand some of this more today is Jim Puckett. And Jim is with the Basel Action Network. Jim is the co-founder and the executive director of the Basel Action Network, where he provides strategic oversight and implements and expands their programs. As an activist for over 25 years, Jim's work on toxic waste and toxic waste trade has helped control pollution, safeguard fragile ecosystems from bioaccumulating toxins, protect the world's poor from health hazards, and reuse the Earth's limited resources. Jim has been a chief proponent of just international policies within the United Nations Basel Convention since its inception in 1989. Jim supports delegates in drafting, approving, and implementing policies that protect people from the global trade of toxic waste. His assistance has been crucial for creating important regional waste trade agreements as well. And he was the first to investigate and expose the export of electronic waste or e-waste. The Basel Action Network's 2002 film, Exporting Harm, the high-tech trashing of Asia, was the first to shine a spotlight on the e-waste trade and transform an unknown dumping practice into a well-recognized global use. And prior to establishing the Basel Action Network, Jim was Toxics Director for Greenpeace International. And so we are so honored and excited to have Jim here with us today to help us understand all of this. Jim, did I get all of that right?
Well, absolutely. It was a long bio there, but yeah, I'm very happy to be here to talk about the latest scourge on the planet. It's not recent, actually, but it's one that people are starting to understand. And in fact, the convention, the Basel Convention, which I work on, has for the first time started to control the trade in plastic waste. So it's become a big part of my job and my life.
Indeed, indeed. And Jim, we are so happy that you could be with us again. We're going to go to break, and after we get back, we're going to jump into a lot of this important information that you have to tell us so you can just make us all much smarter. We'll be right back.
Sounds good.
Thank you. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas community. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, Central Market, Sunflower Shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. And we're told with the best Christmas trees in Texas. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, non-mercury, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on plastic pollution. What is plastic pollution? Why is it important, and how did we get here? And our guest today is Jim Puckett, Executive Director and founder of the Basel Action Network. Again, thank you for being here, Jim. And again, we're so excited for all that you have to tell us.
Thank you.
Jim, the Basel Action Network's goal is to safeguard people and the planet from toxic waste and trade. And BAN currently is tackling 3 toxic waste streams covered by the Basel Convention, and that is, as you mentioned before, e-waste, which is the fastest growing waste stream globally, end-of-life ships like cargo ships that carry our goods, and plastic pollution. So tell us a little bit, Jim, about how and why the Basel Action Network got started, and then help our audience understand why plastic pollution is so toxic and the new things you all are doing in that area.
Sure. Well, BAN got started after the work I did at Greenpeace International was put on hold. And Greenpeace said, we have achieved this great result in our work on waste trade in the Basel Convention. We got a treaty, the first treaty about waste, the first treaty about waste trade. And then we pushed really hard to get a ban within that treaty to forbid the export of hazardous waste dumping on developing countries. And Greenpeace at that certain point said, okay, that campaign is over. But I knew that the job was not over. And so I started the Basel Action Network and have been working on this subject ever since. And as I mentioned, the Basel Convention is now tackling plastics, and it is a treaty that exists. Many people want to have a standalone plastics treaty, and I'm one of those. But for the moment, we have certain tools we can use with international law to try to grapple with the plastics crisis, and it is a crisis.
You said it's international law and you have some tools that you can use. So I imagine it applies to countries like the United States and other countries, but I have to think there's some countries who just flip it off as well.
Let me just say that the U.S. is the only developed country in the world that's not part of that treaty. So it is a big problem because we have the world's most wasteful country per capita is not part of this waste treaty. But we're working on that.
I am appalled. What's with that?
But not
How did
surprised.
that happen?
Well, it's a good question. I think the industry has pushed back hard against having trade barriers on pollution, and they have been highly influential in the Congress, as you know. And that was the beginning, and now our Congress is pretty much dysfunctional. So becoming a party to this treaty or other environmental treaties for the United States is difficult now. So we have to look at other ways of tackling the problem.
And what does the treaty require of those other countries other than us who are parties to it?
So originally it was mostly about hazardous waste, but then they are now looking at other wastes, which are problematic but not necessarily hazardous, and plastics that are mixed and dirty and contaminated are considered one of those for the first time. And that new ruling went into force this year. And what it means is most countries cannot export that plastic waste to other countries without getting their permission first. And that's very significant because we have been shunting our plastic problem all over the world. First, it was going to China. So most of the plastics that was collected in our municipal recycling facilities, every city has these collection systems at your curb, right? The plastic fractions were all going to China. And about 2.5 years ago, China said, no more. We don't want it. It's causing more damage than we're getting gain out of it. And they closed their doors and they enforced it with a massive enforcement effort with armies of customs agents. So you couldn't smuggle it in anymore. So we have this issue now, where is it all going to go? And on the global waste market, it's just chaos right now, where all of these brokers are trying to find countries willing to take our plastic waste.
Let me ask you this. So if me and our listeners saw a big dumpster of plastic waste, what would we be seeing?
Well, you're going to see all kinds of things.
Plastic bottles, I imagine, water bottles.
Plastic bottles, believe it or not, we go through 1 million plastic bottles every minute on planet Earth. 1 million every minute. And that's just for one single use. Nothing is more insane than that. You're also going to find all these grocery bags and food packaging. And in fact, clothing, if it's in the dumpster, 74% of our clothing is polyester, is plastic.
I just found that out last year, and I was surprised. They told me that if polyester clothing, and if you shake it or whatever, you can get fibers, micro, macro fibers coming up. I also heard Cheeto bags, potato chip bags.
Not just Cheeto bags, all these bags are plastic, and they're almost all single use. 33% of all plastic usage, all, including, car parts and computer parts and everything, which are more than single use. But 33% of all our plastics use is used once and then thrown away. It's designed for one quick use, and then it's designed for the dump. And the dump, unfortunately, right now can be, developing countries. Countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam are now getting the main brunt of the international trade in waste because China has said no. Or it could mean it goes into the landfill, or it could mean it goes into an incinerator and gets burned, and we breathe the pollution. Don't
forget that it goes into the waterways, the creeks,
absolutely,
and the ocean.
Oh my God! Yeah, so much of it. We're making 370 million tons of plastic products every year, and 8 million of that ends up in the oceans pretty much right away. Plastic, as we will talk about, I hope, is not really recyclable. We've been sold a bill of goods. We've been duped into thinking that it's just like any other product, that you can just go ahead and recycle it. But there's a reason only 9% of all the plastic, that 8.3 billion tons, only 9% has ever been recycled. And even that rate, I think, is inflated because they count the exports. And these exports, when you follow them, only a fraction of that material actually does get recycled.
Now, you said there's a reason. What is that reason?
Well, it's not recyclable. It is really not inherently a circular material. And we should probably talk about why that is, because it's really the crux of so much misinformation that we've been sold, that don't worry, we can make all this plastic, and don't worry, we can use it only once because we're going to recycle it. The first problem right off the bat is it's really difficult to collect it. And the fact that plastic is not worth very much is very much a part of that equation. If it was made of gold, it would be collected immediately, right? Mm-hmm. But it's so cheap and so it's not valuable. So in fact, it takes a great deal of effort to collect it and then sort it and clean it. So it's just scattered into the environment because there's no incentive really to hang on to it. It's used in so many different ways that it's just dissipated into our marketplace, into our households, into our environment, into our communities. So how do you collect all that? And that's just the first part of the problem. The collection assumes you have a viable process to recycle it, right? Well, the thing about polymers, which make up plastic, is they aren't one-to-one recyclables like glass or copper or aluminum, where you can just melt it down and get copper, glass, and aluminum back. With polymers, the chain of polymers gets shortened every time you remelt it and try to recycle it. So most polymers only have one or two lives to be recycled. And what you have to do is you have to keep adding virgin plastic into the mix. They never tell you that. When your PET bottles get recycled, they have to mix virgin PET into it. And so it really is only truly recyclable one or two times. And the quality of it goes down, and so that's what's known as downcycling. It's not truly one-to-one recycling. The product degrades every time you touch it.
Before we go on much further, talk to our listeners about what is plastic made of? How is plastic made? Because you mentioned polymers, and I think therein lies a kernel that we need to make sure that they understand. How is plastic made?
Yeah, I'm not a chemist, but I know
generally,
it comes out of the ground, right? Fossil fuel.
Oil
and gas. And all this fracking that's been going on that's also very controversial, and the entire front end of the life cycle of plastic is really damaging.
And that starts the toxicity.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about later on, too, in the next segment about a lot of that. But that starts with the life cycle stages. Yeah. They
process these fossil fuels into polymers, starting with monomers, and then they combine them into a long chain, and that's what a polymer is. And its chain-like nature is what makes it so durable and makes it so permanent.
In other words, adding a lot of other chemicals to the oil to make it...
Little molecules combine to make one big molecule and compound, and those are chains of monomers. Every time you recycle, you shorten that chain and you kind of destroy the plastic.
And I imagine, Jim, that there's one chain made into plastics where the plastic bags come from. There's another chain that makes our dashboards in our car.
Exactly.
There's another chain that makes the plastic bottles. So you start with that crude oil and what its derivative, and you add all those chemicals to make all these different types of plastics, right on down to our polyester and our chip bags. And so I wanted people to understand that. But you're starting with those fossil fuels, and you're adding all this stuff. And that gives... The fossil fuel in and of itself has toxicity. And I have to think that all these things that are added at the different stages for the different products come with their own set of issues.
Yeah, so I know we only got a few seconds left, but we really need to talk about what you raised about the additives. So the other problem with recycling is that they've been completely ignoring what happens to the toxicity of the additives. People just put their head in the sand about it. But every plastic polymer has multiple amounts of additives, sometimes more than half.
Oh, my goodness.
Actual plastic.
And therein lies a big problem. We're going to go to break, and on the other side, we're going to dig into these additives because that seems to be the hidden culprit here. We'll be right back on the other side of the break with Jim Puckett, Executive Director and founder of the Basel Action Network. And he is just making us so much smarter. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. To today's show, the first of our December topics on plastic pollution. And today we are with Jim Puckett, Executive Director and founder of the Basel Action Network, and he is making us smarter about what plastic pollution is, why it's important, and how we got here. So again, thank you, Jim. Now, right before the break, and I want to jump right in on this, we were talking about, I don't know if I want to call it hidden toxicity, but certainly a place, or maybe the place, where plastics become toxic. And that is all these additives that go into them to make all these many and diverse plastics that are just all around us at this moment.
Exactly. So there's no such thing as a polymer that's marketed without additives. So these are the things that give them color, give them flexibility, sometimes makes them toxic intentionally so that microbes don't chew on them. There's so many different reasons to have additives, and sometimes the actual proportion of the additives is more than half. For example, a lot of PVC, polyvinyl chloride, which we make pipes and siding and things out of, has phthalates in it that are more than half of the polymer. So you're dealing with stuff that is inherently very, very toxic. For example, PET bottles, everybody is thinking, wow, this is the success story. These soda bottles, we can recycle those. People have their heads in the sand and do not talk about the fact that PET has antimony trioxide in it, which is a carcinogen. It has bromine in it. It has phthalates in it. And the effects of those are very damaging, even at minute quantities. So some of these chemicals have the properties of being endocrine disruptors. It's a big issue in environmental health.
Now, I think a lot of people just don't know it, but a lot of people now have a sense. They don't know the exact. They can't tell you everything. But I think many people have gotten the point. You know, there's a big deal where don't leave your water in the bottles out in the heat because that's a bad thing.
Right.
They know that. And it also seems to be fairly well known to BPA.
Right.
A certain type. They can't tell you the rest of it, but they know that part.
Well, that was one that got exposed, and rightly so. BPA is an endocrine disruptor. So these things are blocking the natural functioning of our hormones. So the hormones only direct traffic in the human body. They're the messengers of the human body. So you'll have chaos as a human body if you don't have properly functioning hormones. These chemicals in tiny, tiny amounts, like BPA, which is put into plastic and food containers, et cetera, and children's toys, is creating havoc in our bodies. And the long-term effects are going to be most pronounced. And you're not going to keel over and die from chewing on a piece of plastic. But we actually, as humans, are consuming 5 grams of plastic every week. That's largely through the air, through our food, and through water. That's consuming it. So we are getting this. And, of course, children are much more disproportionately harmed by this. They are much more vulnerable. So we're just playing with fire here. We don't really know what that fire is. But part of why things are not recyclable is these additives also create havoc in the recycling processes, as you can imagine, especially when they're in large proportions. And they're usually just forgotten and ignored. So somebody says, oh, I got a great recycling system here. I say, what do you do with the additives? Silence.
Like, no.
They just kind of disappear, right? So it's a huge problem. This is why plastic is not inherently circular. It really can't be part of a circular economy, which we're trying to achieve. We're going to have to phase it down. We're going to have to turn off the tap. You can't run around with enough mops and enough recycling to solve the problem. The recycling doesn't function. So what they've been doing, Bernice, because they know they're in trouble, they want to make 4 times as much plastic in the next 25 years than we're consuming currently. They want to double down on plastic. And so really they're up against the hard place because they say, we're going to recycle. Don't worry, we're going to recycle. But the actual mechanical recycling, as I told you, doesn't work. So they're trying to come up with a new concept called advanced recycling or chemical recycling. And if you look at it, it's very much in the research and development and not very probable stage, because it takes so much energy to kind of reverse the process, chemical process, breaking down these polymers into monomers. And usually what they're breaking them down to is into fuel. And so what they're looking at doing is burning.
Taking it back out in the air. Taking it from plastic pollution and making it into air pollution.
Oh, and our climate. I mean, we don't need to burn more fossil fuels is what, in effect, this is doing. It came from fossil fuels. You kind of bring it back to that state of oil and gas and burn it. No, this is not what our planet needs right now. So every way you look at it, we're in a crisis because one of the most powerful industries on Earth, the fossil fuel industry and the plastic packaging industry, is all one really, is pushing 4 times the amount of production.
So, oh my. Is there some nefarious reason they're doing that?
Well,
because they know the end is coming, or what?
No, they've been profiting immensely, as you know, from selling their oil for cars and transport and motility. But more and more the cars are electric.
Right.
And they want to keep selling the same amount of fossil fuels. So where's the market? More plastic, more single-use plastic. And they're looking at the developing world, who hasn't quite gone as crazy as we have with packaging and plastic this and plastic that. They're looking at that as a huge open market. So they're doing some nefarious things like selling products that have always been, handled and contained in a more bio-friendly way, not using plastic in the developing world, like soaps and foods and such. They're trying to sell the plastic packaging and in smaller and smaller little amounts so that people can afford it, supposedly. So they're taking things like soaps and shampoos and making these little tiny plastic sachets, kind of like what we're used to seeing mustard and ketchup in a fast food place. They're putting everything into those sachet plastics.
Oh, my.
And, of course, those just are ending up in all the rivers in Asia right now, flushed out into the seas almost immediately. So this is their grand scheme, is to keep selling the public with the idea, don't worry, plastics can be recycled, and if not, we can burn it. Don't worry, it's all very good for the planet. Yeah.
What are the main plastic polluters?
Oh, wow. Well, you've all seen these little chasing arrows, this little triangle with a number in it. Mm-hmm. And those are the main types of plastics that we use. There's PET, PET, there's HDPE, which is high-density polyethylene, polyvinyl chloride, PVC we mentioned. There's low-density polyethylene. But
what are the products? How do we, as everyday people, see those that we're...
Oh, my goodness. And that's also what we need to work on in terms of our personal lives. So it's challenging to really get plastic out of your life because of, it's everywhere. But the plastic packaging in the marketplace is really problematic. Even if you bring your own plastic bags, or your own cloth bags, I should say, to replace the plastic bags, you bring your own bags to the market and bring it home that way, you still are having to buy products which are all packaged in plastic.
Yeah.
Cheeses, everything, you name it. So those become massive amounts of pollution. Plastic basically turns into pollution. If it's not being used at that moment and it's not burned, it is pollution.
You would say packaging is the main polluter.
I would say that. Also, when we burn it, it kind of creates a hidden pollution. The clothing is a really untapped an issue that most people aren't aware of.
Indeed, they are not.
But this polyester clothing, once we get rid of it, what do they do with it? You ever wondered? They put it in ships and they send it off to Africa. Very much so. And there, they can't market all that plastic. They make some use of the better stuff. But I just got a picture the other day from Ghana of just massive amounts of polyester clothing all dumped near the beach in a huge, massive pile. This is happening all over. When we have a problem, we can't figure out what to do with it. We don't burn it. We often just put it on a ship and export it.
Indeed. I want to start in on microbeads and plastics in our cosmetics and personal care. That was shocking to me. I thought those things had to be FDA approved. Does the FDA not care, or do they not know, or what's going on with that?
Well, plastic is benefited by the myth that it's inert, that it really is not toxic, that it's just something you add. It has its uses. It can litter, but don't worry, it's not really toxic. Well, this is not true. And what I mentioned to you before, the additives are the primary reason for it. I mean, the actual polymers is a hydrocarbon. You burn it, you create volatile organic compounds. You try to melt it, for example. So it can create pollution immediately in the recycling facility, for example, or in the production. But the real long-term toxicity that everyone's blinded that this doesn't exist are the additives. And there are about, they did this study with 34 different common products. And they found that 74% of those were toxic. And they found that there were 1,000 chemicals, many of which were only identified by a machine, a mass spectrometer, didn't have a name. They didn't really know the toxicity of these thousands of chemicals.
Indeed.
Only a fraction of them were known. So we are really playing guinea pigs with all of our lives.
I know, and the public has no idea. We're going to go to break, and we'll be right back on the other side to talk about that a lot more. Because I'd like to see, just like they have the food labeling, the contents in the foods, and why don't we have a content labeling in the plastic products? Because like when I read at the introduction how a lot of it contains coal tar and things like that, that's frightening. We'll be right back on the other side. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, central markets, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. And we're told with the best Christmas trees in Texas. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, non-mercury, and looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on plastic pollution. And we are here with Jim Puckett, Executive Director and founder of the Basel Action Network, and he is helping us understand plastic pollution. What is plastic pollution? Why is it important? And how did we get here? Again, thank you so much, Jim, for taking time from your very busy schedule to help us understand this some more.
Thank you.
To jump back in where we left off, I want to talk about the life cycle of plastics. Tell us about that, where it started and what it involves. And I gathered, too, from one of the things that we were talking about prior to going to break, that all along that cycle, you have the input of toxins or toxic chemicals.
Yeah. No, it's very important not to think of the crisis just as being the plastic waste, the very end of the cycle.
Where does it start?
The entire life cycle is fraught with environmental harm.
Indeed.
And obviously, you're pulling fossil fuels out of the ground. Everyone knows the damage caused just by the fracking part of that process.
And that's the beginning of plastic for the most part.
Yeah, so you're bringing the hydrocarbons up, and then you process them into polymers. Those factories are usually in places where people that are disproportionately harmed are the ones that are disadvantaged in society. It's an environmental justice issue. Those are in Louisiana, the poorer parts of New Jersey, Ohio. They're building many more of these, and they're putting them all around the world in developing countries now.
Then let me ask you this. That's the factories where they take the fossil fuel and begin to make the various types of plastic.
Turn it into polymers, exactly.
What are some of the names of those companies? How do we know we're passing them? Do we see a big smokestack or what?
The American Chemical Council are the ones fighting the hardest right now to defeat efforts to stop using so much single-use plastic. If you go to their website, you will see all the major companies, including companies like
DuPont,
Dow Chemical, like Coca-Cola, the companies that are using the plastic. You think you're buying a soda, they're selling you plastic as well. So it's all of the major industries, and behind it all is the fossil fuel industry. So BP, Exxon, you name it. So it's a formidable group of very powerful companies that have doubled and tripled and quadrupled down on the notion that they're going to make more plastic. The future, they want to have by 2050 4 times the rate of growth in plastic. They want to have create 4 times more. And it's all about making single-use plastic. That's the growth areas I mentioned. And that's the most disgusting, stupid, insane part of the market. Why would you make something that is permanent, that is poison, that you're only going to use once?
For example, with Coca-Cola and sodas and beverages, they have a choice of putting it in an aluminum can.
Well, think about how, when I was really young, I remember every major community had their Coca-Cola bottling company. It was a bottling company.
It was a glass bottle.
It was not putting things in. And those bottles were all brought back to the bottling place and refilled and refilled and refilled again. Well, this can easily happen again. In fact, it's the thing that I keep reminding myself, and all of us have to remind ourselves, 70 years ago, we didn't have plastics in the marketplace. You mentioned Bakelite was produced way back in 1907, but the market really didn't absorb and start producing plastic until the 50s.
Right.
So you look back at old movies of airlines, for example, and they're serving you food on the airplane. They are using tongs, they are using bowls, they are using silverware, they're using cloth, napkins. It's very elegant, and there's not one single-use plastic because they didn't have them. So it's really reassuring because we know we can go back 70 years.
Yeah, we know it's possible.
We used to do. Exactly. We don't need these things.
And
what
we
they
like
are
it.
Is they're cheap and they're convenient.
Yes.
That's the real selling point. Very convenient, but that convenience is killing it.
Now, Jim, I kind of got you to digress a little bit. I got off on my tangents about the plastic bottles, but you mentioned it starts at the oil head.
Yeah.
It comes out.
That's at the oil head.
And then the manufacturers,
God knows, like you say, where it ends up. So after they first make the polymers, then they take it to the place where the packaging or the products are made. That's where they add all the additives in. Those factories are also very toxic. They also produce their own waste and residues that have to go somewhere. Then the thing goes out there in the marketplace. Again, 33% of it is only used once. The rest of it goes into things that are going to become waste at some point. And the horror show of it all is that this stuff lasts so long in the environment, and it is toxic. So it's pollution, and it's massive amounts of it that is not going away. It's just going to be added to and added to. So the only real solution, if you had your bathtub in your attic, that in your house that was overflowing, and you went in there and said, "Oh my God, I got to do something." The bathtub's overflowing. You wouldn't run and grab a mop now, would you? You wouldn't say, "Oh, I got to clean up the floor. It's all over the floor." No, you would turn off the tap. It's the very first thing you do. And we have that kind of crisis right now. And we have to turn off the tap. We're making way too much plastic. And we will always have some plastic. It's smart to have some. For example, for medical devices, even medical uses need to be single-use sometimes. We will have certain things that make sense to have a plastic which the polymer is not containing hazardous additives, which we don't have today. But we can do that. We can design that. And we have a long life for it. And we have a plan for how to properly recycle it because that polymer has been designed to be recycled. And it's designed not to have toxic additives. But we have way more than we can possibly manage. And the idea of making 4 times that is just lunacy.
It seems like that could be a very profitable emerging industry, that is to design or invent non-toxic polymers and additives, yes.
But before that, we have to realize, okay, we have too much. It's just too much. It's not okay to make products that last this long that are only used once. First focus is we got to get rid of those out of our lives, and that means in our personal lives, we got to find alternatives for our plastic bags whenever we go shopping, our water bottles, our coffee and tea cups, all of that. Those things we can do. and we can pass laws where we phase out single-use plastics.
And we were doing that, here in Texas, a number of places, including here in North Texas where I lived, we had passed a plastic bag ban, then it got overturned.
There's 32 countries that have a plastic bag ban, and most of them are in Africa. So they have really taken the brunt because they don't have good collection systems. All of that plastic becomes immediately right in their face, right in their rivers, choking their streams and their beaches.
It's choking our streams, too. I belong to an urban environmental organization here, and we take care of some urban nature spaces. And in one of them, we have this place, we call it Trashy Creek. Because every time it rains upstream, we clean it. We have volunteers going out every Saturday, we clean it. Every time it rains, the whole area just fills up with trash. And so how's Trashy Creek doing today? But I have two important things that I want to touch upon with you, Jim, before our session is over. And that is, can you talk about the intersection of plastic pollution and climate change? Climate change seems to affect everything. Where is that intersection?
Well, 4% of our fossil fuels and our carbon problem come immediately just from the production of plastic. So that's in the production phase. That doesn't even talk about what happens to the plastic in the environment. So much of it does end up getting burned. This is how they deal with plastic in most of the world, is they create landfills and they set them on fire. So it does get burned. Now the industry is also wanting to burn it, either in high-tech incinerators, which is still putting that carbon back into the environment, or through this idea of turning it into fuel and burning it that way. So much of it gets burned. The rest of it is ending up in the environment, slowly degrading. That carbon eventually does get released. So another 4% is said to be from that latter part of the life cycle. And so it's 8% in total is reckoned to be contributing to climate directly.
Indeed. My other question for you, Jim, before we have to go, and we only have a couple of minutes, and that is microplastics.
Yeah.
Can you touch upon that very briefly?
You said we're just surrounded with plastic, and I have become more aware just in the last couple of years how bad things are. We have it in our water. We have it in everything. We have it in our food. When you wash your clothes, 700,000 microplastic fibers are released every time you do one load of laundry. And most of us do have athletic clothes, et cetera, that are made out of polyester, that are made out of plastic. This is a problem as long as you have plastic clothing. And the people are saying, well, we can try to trap it and we'll put our laundry in a bag and filter it out. It's really not going to be the solution. So that turns into microplastics, goes into the ocean, really impacts, and we're not even sure how badly and how it impacts marine life. But you can imagine if you're swimming in toxicity, it's not going to be a good thing.
And you're eating that toxicity, too,
Exactly.
those microplastics that get into the fish that we eat and the seafood that we love. And so
it's in mother's milk. It's in baby poo. I mean, every time you see a study, you go, oh, my God, what is the effect of all this? And we don't really know. A lot of you.
We are beginning to find out, though. Like I said, a lot of people thought Shanna Swain's book was a little controversial, but I thought it was certainly a lot to be considered because there's a lot of things, a lot of health issues out there, and we don't know why.
It leads to disease, and people go, well, how did we get this disease? Well, it's really hard to do cause and effect and pinpoint the exact culprits, but we're smarter than that. We can know where it's coming from.
And we're getting there. It just takes a long time because of the cumulative effect. It doesn't happen right away. Jim, we're going to have to go, and we are looking forward to having you back with us. It's just been really exciting for you to open up a lot of these issues with us.
Can I make two plugs?
Two plugs.
If you want to get plastic out of your life, there's an excellent book called Life Without Plastic. I highly recommend it. The other one is, if you want to know more about the life cycle of plastic, there's an excellent film called The Story of Plastic. So those are my two plugs, and thank you so much for this opportunity, Bernice.
And I'm writing that down. We're going to try to get that on both of those on our website in some kind of way. Thank you so much. We have been with Jim Puckett. He has made us smarter. Jim is the executive director and founder of the Basel Action Network. We appreciate you very much for making time to be with us today, and we certainly appreciate the work, the very important work you all are doing there at BAN. Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for listening in today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your home, in your social circles, in your workplaces, at the water cooler, and in the grocery checkout line. so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is a result of a trillion tiny acts taken by billions of people every day, like yourselves. And each of those tiny acts can seem insignificant, but all of them add up one way or the other to the change that we each live through. Thank you so much for listening. This is your host, Bernice Butler, and join us again next week as we continue our conversation about plastic pollution. Thank you.